The agenda is set. I'm Brent Goff in Berlin. It's time to talk. Germany has a new government, a grand coalition. Should the world have grand expectations? Egypt's Sinai Desert, a haven for human traffickers. Can anyone stop the torture? And the crowds of Kiev protest position and power. Who will decide Ukraine's future? Well, welcome to the show, everyone. I've invited three people today to talk, argue, and pry apart these headlines. Her country is being blackmailed by Russia, but she says the protesters are not going away. Irina Solenenko joins me today. She was part of Ukraine's Orange Revolution, and I'm going to be asking her what this latest crisis is going to mean for her country. Irina, it's good to have you on the show with us today.
Thank you.
Giving voice to the victims in the desert. My next guest is the co-author of a disturbing report on human trafficking in the Sinai. Meron Estefanos is co-founder of the International Commission on Eritrean Refugees, and she is here today to talk about what has become a refugee torture trap. Meron, it's good to have you on the show with us today. And it took more than 2 months, but Germans now have a new government. Torsten Benner is director of the Global Public Policy Institute think tank here in Berlin. Torsten, what do you think? Will anything great come from this grand coalition?
I think in terms of global engagement of Germany, I don't expect that much to come. Merkel will stay the course. She'll be unfazed by the critics who complain about Germany's current account surplus or the austerity policies she's advocating in the EU, and she'll just continue to muddle through.
We've talked a lot about what the world expects. Let me pull in everyone at the table here. Irina, should the world expect great things from this new German government?
Well, we actually had the same constellation before 2009. And but I think throughout this time, the German policy has transformed a little bit. So I think we might have a new focuses, but more or less, I think German foreign policy is institutionalized and it's very much guided by institutions which are more or less stable.
We're going to talk about where this foreign policy, what it means for Ukraine in a moment too. And Meron, you live in Sweden, so you have an interesting vantage point as well. Big hopes for what's going to happen in Berlin the next 4 years?
Yeah, I'm hoping that Angela Merkel will use her influence in the EU, especially when it's on the refugee policy. So that's my hope, at least.
Yeah, I mean, everyone right now talking about Angela Merkel, the German chancellor. She has taken the oath of office, and if she completes this 4-year term, she will eclipse Margaret Thatcher as the EU's longest-serving female head of government. She is today, without a doubt, Europe's most powerful leader. Well, now she has a new government and a new cabinet. So what can the world expect from Berlin?
The wait is finally over. Almost 3 months after general elections, Germany's new grand coalition government is ready to knuckle down. Wolfgang Schäuble is staying in his post at the finance ministry, a sign there'll be no change to Germany's policies on tackling the Eurozone crisis. Frank-Walter Steinmeier is back as foreign minister, a job he held in Merkel's first grand coalition. Back then, the two openly clashed over Russia and China. Steinmeier supported dialogue and cautioned against alienating them, whilst Merkel favoured taking a tougher line. Expectations are high for new defence minister Ursula von der Leyen. She inherits the job of modernising the German military and promoting the pooling and sharing of Europe's military resources. They're ready to get down to government, but critics say the new grand coalition might have a tough time turning pledges into policy.
Let's talk about policy. Obviously, we have to pick up on one of the big stories right now, and that is what a U.S. judge has ruled about NSA spying in the United States. It's been a huge topic in Germany. Is this new German government going to do anything differently when it comes to having their own people spied upon?
I think they're going to try to push back. They're going to try to continue to get assurances from the US that the spying, at least on government officials, has to stop. But I don't see any ambitious measures being taken by the new government. But we'll see. There has been cooperation, for example, with other countries who've been antagonized by the spying scandal, a country such as Brazil. And that could actually lead to forming an anti-spying coalition that goes against both what the US is doing and what Russia and China are doing with regard to surveillance and spying.
But at the end of the day, you think it's going to be continuity. We're not going to see any real new measures coming from Berlin.
Right now, there's very little on the table. The coalition treaty doesn't list so many things. What you're going to see is efforts to regain technological independence, to build up their own industries in Germany, and let's see how far these measures go. Some of it seems quite ludicrous to me.
Okay, what seems ludicrous? Because the whole world is looking to see what Germany is going to do right now.
This whole illusion that the IT industry is a little bit like Airbus. So you can say there's Boeing out there, and we started Airbus, and now there's Google, and there's the big American companies, and we can just build a European IT Airbus. I think it doesn't work like that, and runs the risk of wasting a lot of billions of tax euros on that project.
I mean, if we put spying to the side, what should the world be expecting from this new government?
I think not that much. I mean, first of all, they should be expecting a focus on domestic affairs in Germany, because if you followed the debate, foreign policy didn't feature much at all in the campaign, didn't feature much in the kind of hand-wringing over the coalition treaty. That was not the main focus. The main focus is on pensions. The main focus is on managing Germany's energy transition.
But Martin, isn't that, it's always that way, isn't it, in elections? Politics is always local. But once you're in power, then you have to deal with the world. You have to deal with it, and Merkel and the government will continue to deal with the crisis of the day. But I don't think, as the trailer showed, Merkel and Schäuble are very much committed to staying the course on the euro crisis. The SPD might actually introduce a few measures to soften the blow a little bit of austerity, but I don't think it will fundamentally change. What you might see, though, is a coalition of Mr. Steinmeier, Frau von der Leyen, the new defense minister, also Mr. Schäuble, and also the new head of the finance ministry, and also the new head of the chancellery. They're all very pro-European, and the chancellery in the previous term has been very kind of unambitious on kind of European policies writ large, and there might be some changes on that, which would be very welcome. A lot of people have been speculating that now that Merkel is in power, the government has been formed, she has this term nailed down, she's going to let up on this strong austerity push. What do you see?
I don't necessarily see that, because I do think that Chancellor Merkel is convinced that the crisis countries need to cut back their spending. They need to kind of rein in their deficit, and that's the way to prosperity. She's very much convinced by that. She's also very much under pressure on the domestic front. Let's not forget that the anti-Euro party just about didn't manage to get into the parliament. There'll be European elections in May. They'll be running a big kind of anti-Euro campaign, and Merkel needs to listen to those voices. And I think it's the majority of the German public that don't favor giving more help to crisis countries unless they're willing to cut their deficits.
Okay, so that script has not changed. Let's talk about German-Russian policy. I want to pull Irina in on this. What happens if Germany stays quiet and doesn't say too much regarding Russia?
Well, that's what we used to observe before 2009. I would call the policy Russia first policy when it comes to Eastern Europe. That's what we observed before 2009. But I think
Russia first policy meaning
overlooking other countries in between, but really focusing.
Such as the Ukraine.
Yes, exactly. But I think now German foreign policy has transformed a bit. What I see that the gas lobby in Germany has decreased or diminished its influence. And I think it's more value-based policy now. And I think it's very important now to make a focus on values when it comes to Russia. For instance, the Sochi Olympic Games are upcoming, and the German president has already told that he's going to boycott. Why not other leaders also do the same? I think because Russia doesn't lose anything from its non-democratic and imperialistic policies. And maybe if Germany makes a clear gesture that values do matter, democracy does matter, and Russia has something to lose from not observing these principles, then maybe Russian policy could have changed.
Would it make a difference in the world if the German chancellor said she wasn't going to Sochi, to the Games? I mean, the president has said he's not going, but if Angela Merkel said, I'm not going, would that mean something to you?
I think it will be a very strong signal, and maybe also to other countries, some other countries. I think it makes sense maybe to discuss it diplomatically behind the curtains first, and maybe that not only Germany but other countries also do the same step.
Torsten, yeah, go ahead.
But I think there's some merit in this, and François Hollande, the French president, decided not to go, and there's some merit to this argument, but you can also play it differently. Chancellor Merkel could decide to go, and while there in Sochi, she could meet with opposition activists, with gay rights activists, and send a signal, we're with you, we care about those in Russia who stand up for freedom and for civil liberties, and we don't just boycott the country and say we'll stay away.
But Torsten, do you think she's going to do that? But you're right, that would set a strong signal, but do you think she's going to do that?
I mean, all indications show that she did not favor our President Gauck's refusal to go to Sochi. So Merkel is very pragmatic on Russia. She's not anti-Russian at all. She cares about civil liberties, of course, but she also cares about keeping the channels of communication with Russia open, and for Germany not to be seen as an anti-Russian country. And that's why I think Merkel has proved to be very pragmatic on Russia policy. A little more values-based than Chancellor Schröder was, for sure, but certainly very mindful of the need to be an interlocutor for Russia.
Let's push this a little bit. We've got an interesting new defense minister now in Germany, Ursula von der Leyen, the first female defense minister in Germany. That, of course, making headlines. Another strong figure, a lot of people saying a strong woman in German politics. I mean, I'm looking far into the future. Are we looking at the next German chancellor when we look at Ursula von der Leyen?
I think that at least is Chancellor Merkel's plan. She put her in this very visible position of defense minister, and also a counterintuitive move to have a woman in that position in order to shine on the global stage, also to prove herself, because there's a lot of reform to be done with regard to the German army. But if she pulls that off, she for sure has a good shot at being the next candidate in 2017. And then if the Green Party decides to go with the Christian Democrats next time around, maybe you'll have a Green Christian Democrat coalition with Ursula von der Leyen as chancellor.
Okay. The world obviously sees women in power in Germany. Miron, let me ask you, your home country, Eritrea, but also in Sweden, where you live, is Germany's greatest foreign policy tool just the fact of being and setting an example?
No.
Or would you like to see it be more proactive and not so pragmatic the way Torsten's describing it?
Yeah, well, more proactive, I think. I think it shouldn't matter whether it's a female or not. We shouldn't concentrate on that. Better concentrate on their policies.
What about human rights? I mean, you're a human rights activist.
Well, when it comes to Russia, if we are going to speak about Russia, there's a lot of human rights abuses. It's not democratic yet. It's a fake democracy. A lot of journalists are being arrested for writing. There is no freedom of expression as much as people would like to see. So I hope that Germany will use its influence, or as he said, that Merkel will go to the Olympic Games and send a signal, like she said.
Okay. Getting back to Ursula von der Leyen, this first female defense minister, is it possible, Torsten, that we could see her actually beef up the German military, or use the German military to create a stronger EU military response force?
That is at least what is to be hoped for, and perhaps the stars are aligned, because a lot of austerity pressures in the budget in other countries force European armies to cooperate more, pooling and sharing, that is called. And if Germany led by example and said, we don't need to have capabilities in all different parts of the army, and we kind of share and pool our resources, and we also open up our defense industry contracts to other bidders. I think Germany could make a huge difference toward integration of the whole European defense arena.
And even, very briefly, even the possibility of sending troops in for the UN or something without having the Bundestag's approval. Do you ever think we're going to see that?
Well, that's an open question. The two parties, the CDU and the SPD, didn't agree on whether to change the procedure.
Right.
That's going to be revisited. Maybe there'll be slight changes, but there could be also kind of very short-term measures. For example, we're getting 4,000 troops back from Afghanistan in 2014. If we just said we commit 10% of these 4,000 troops to UN missions across the globe, that at least would be a signal that Germany is willing to contribute, also to UN missions.
Okay. Yes or no? Do you believe that this will be Angela Merkel's last term, or will she run again in 2017?
Yes, I believe that's her last term. She's enjoying the ride, but I think she can also think about other things to do with her life.
And the history books. All right. Well, immigration policy will demand attention from Germany's new government. Scenes of despair and death have become all too common as migrants and refugees cross the Mediterranean to reach Europe. Well, there is another route out of Africa, and it is just as perilous, across Egypt's Sinai desert to the border with Israel. Well, a new report just presented to the European Parliament says that tens of thousands of people from Eritrea, Sudan, and Ethiopia have been abducted, held for ransom, and tortured trying to make it across the Sinai.
This fence snakes through the desert along the Israeli-Egyptian border. It's designed to prevent terrorists, weapons, and refugees from sub-Saharan Africa making it across into Israel. Countless numbers from Eritrea still decide to make the perilous journey. On their way through Egypt's Sinai desert, hundreds are kidnapped by traffickers and held for ransom in camps. This center in Israel cares for those who make it out. A nurse translates as this Eritrean man describes the violence and abuse he experienced.
He was beaten upside down, even his productive organ and his soul, every place was beaten until he paid the 25,000.
He was then dropped at the border and crossed into Israel on foot. Like others who survived the camps, though, he was left scarred from the experience, both physically and mentally.
Meron, help us understand what is happening here. You say thousands of people coming from your home country of Eritrea are leaving every month trying to make it to Israel, or trying to at least get to the Mediterranean.
Yeah. It used to be like that, the whole thing, how it's connected is that people, Eritreans, up to 3,000 to 5,000 Eritreans flee every month because of the dictatorship back home. So these people, once they are in Sudan, you go either to Ethiopia or to Sudan. So there is a shoot-to-kill policy, and it's harder to get to the Ethiopian refugee camps, so it's easier to get to Sudan. So a lot of people cross into Sudan. From Sudan, then they would travel from Sahara, then to Libya, and then from Libya by Mediterranean Sea, then into Italy or Malta. But this is stopped in 2006 when EU made a deal with Gaddafi.
Right.
So people were stuck, they had nowhere to go, because if you are in Sudan, there is a risk that the Eritrean government can kidnap you back into the country and imprison you for betraying the country, for fleeing from the country. On top of that, life is very hard in Sudan, living as a refugee. Not a good process with UNHCR, not resettlement. So people have been waiting for 10 years, 15 years, and living at risk. So for this reason, people start looking for other ways, and some of the Bedouin tribes started smuggling people into Israel.
Right.
So those that made it to Israel.
So that was through the Sinai Desert. So
Yeah.
we had basically a business of smuggling people from Eritrea to Israel.
Yes, exactly. So the ones that arrived in Israel first, they were received, they were given refugee status, and they could work and live freely. But then, everybody started hearing, oh, there's a new route to Israel. It's a democratic country where you can work and live freely. Then everybody started going into Israel. Then Israel changed their refugee policy right away.
Right, and they basically put a wall up along the entire Sinai border, correct?
Yes.
So no one's getting through.
No, nobody's getting through. But the thing is that when Israel changed their refugee policy, so what happened is they start calling them infiltrators, which means you have no right. They will give you as an Eritrean, they will give you a permit to live in the country, but no welfare assistance. You're not allowed to work, no medical treatment. So life was much better in Sudan. So people stopped going into Israel before they built the fence, actually. And then these people, the Bedouins, they used to smuggle people and make thousands and thousands of money, start losing. And then the route to Europe opened again after the Libyan revolution. So then they start kidnapping people from Sudan. They would wait right at the border of Eritrea and Sudan and kidnap these people. They are not registered. Nobody would ask about them and take them into Sinai.
But they capture people in Sinai, for example, and knowing that these people are not going to be able to get into Israel. So they're holding these people hostage and asking for ransom money. So they used to make money getting these people across the border. Now they're making money by holding these people and torturing them.
Yes, exactly.
I mean,
it's a very lucrative business. I mean, back then when the people wanted to go to Israel willingly, they used to pay $1,000 probably to get into Israel from Sudan. But then, they start ransom money went up to $50,000 per person.
$50,000 a person. You do a radio show where from Sweden over satellite, over the internet, and you actually talk to people that are being held hostage, right? All right, we've got a clip of that we want to show our viewers. Let's just listen to that. When you see that, I mean, how do you feel? These are people that are about to die.
Yeah, every time I hear their voices, it just kills me inside, even though I speak to them on a daily basis, up to 10 to 15 hostages a day, but still they become your family because I talk to them almost on a daily basis, not only for my radio show, but just to give them a moral support. It doesn't feel good.
Are you ever afraid, though? I mean, it's almost counterintuitive that these hostage takers are giving the hostages a phone, and they can call you, get in touch with you, and then this is being broadcast. Do you ever feel like these criminals are using you to get their message out and to basically raise more money?
Actually, the phone did not start. They don't know that they are talking to me, first of all. Secondly, it's not that they call me. I call them. Their families call me. The first time happened to be that somebody that I know, his brother was kidnapped together with 28 others. And so he said, if you don't believe me, you can call them yourself. And that's how I started. I felt really sorry for them. And I felt that this should be told. Eritreans should just do something about this because how long, I mean, there has been so many catastrophes, so many tragedies when it comes to Eritreans. Many die in the Mediterranean Sea. So I broadcasted it, but the phones are given so that they could call their families. And the families would listen as they are being tortured, as they are being raped and hanged and everything.
Do you think you've been able to save someone's life by having this radio program?
Yeah, it has happened that many people that listen to my program would raise money. I myself have raised some money. In the beginning, when I started, when I broadcasted it, I thought maybe if I tell the world then something would happen. Then I saw nothing happen, so I raised money to rescue some of the hostages.
You've actually talked to people who have been on boats on the Mediterranean trying to get to Europe, right?
Yes.
Yes. You've talked to people who later on actually died.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a big burden to carry with you. But I'm sure that has motivated you. That's why you co-authored this report. You brought a copy of that report with you that you presented to the European Parliament. Tell us a little bit about the boy who's on the cover there. He was taken hostage, right?
Yeah. This boy, when he was 15, he was kidnapped in Sudan just when he left, and then he was kidnapped and taken to the Sinai. He was there for a very long time and tortured, burned. That's when I know him. I used to interview them and call them whenever they needed something. And his family, friends, everybody that knows him raised $38,000 for his release. And then after he was released, Egypt detained him for entering the country illegally, even though he was brought forcibly to Egypt. Then they deported him to Ethiopia. And then from Ethiopia, with the help of some friends, he left to Libya. And from Libya, he survived the October 3 boat tragedy in Lampedusa.
Right, off the coast of Lampedusa. Europe, it's a big topic right now here in Europe, also for the German government, which we were speaking about earlier, is immigration policy. What do you want to see Europe do for people like this young boy?
I mean, if there was a better resettlement, this boy wouldn't have to go, because he is one of the lucky ones. But 12 of the Sinai survivors actually died in Lampedusa. And these are torture victims. These are people that need help mentally, physically. Some of them have lost both hands. Some of them have become, they would just burn their eyes and take them out. The torture method is very horrible. So I feel that first they should be recognized as torture victims, and they should have a better resettlement to bring them somewhere. They wouldn't need to go through Libya again and die in the Mediterranean.
So a better resettlement policy. Is that the answer? I mean,
that is definitely the answer, because this horrible story is just one facet of the callousness of the European asylum regime. And the answer that the German government gives is wholly inadequate, because if they actually manage to come to Germany, these Eritrean refugees are likely to get asylum, political asylum. These are not economic refugees. They'll be recognized as asylum seekers.
They have to get to Germany
but
first.
You need to kind of get across the fortress Europe in the first place, which is almost impossible. Germany is co-financing this big wall around Europe and around the Mediterranean that almost makes it impossible for refugees to come into Europe in the first place and claim asylum.
But
that's very unjust.
We've heard on this show numerous times that the answer for Europe is to increase foreign aid so that people do not want to leave their home countries.
Which is wholly inadequate, right? What does foreign aid do to change the regime in Eritrea? Nothing. So that just goes to show that actually was the answer of the previous interior minister in Germany. I hope we have a new one now. I hope he doesn't sing the old tune and recognizes that in order to help the Eritrean situation, for example, political refugees, it doesn't make any sense in the short term to send economic aid.
And I just want to pull you in on this. When what do you say when you hear this? I mean, Europe has the door open for your country, Ukraine, and here it seems like the door is shut to Africa.
Well, I think it's the same. I mean, but not so many people from Ukraine want to flee, probably, right? Because the regime is better there. I think, Europe has to human rights issue should prevail over economic and security considerations. That's for sure. And the EU has to think about the policy which would accommodate those people, or maybe create conditions in the neighboring countries which are better off, where those people could settle down, probably.
I mean, it has become like a lottery, where if you make the trip, we'll give you, your prize will be asylum. But in trying to get it here, I mean, we all know how many people have died in the Mediterranean Sea. So I think that there should be a better resettlement system. These people, had there been a better resettlement while they are in Sudan, or if you could provide something where they could empower themselves by having different kind of programs in the refugee camps, maybe these people wouldn't try to leave either. But something has to change, and it's all.
Do you go back to Eritrea before we move on? I mean, that is your home country. That's where you were born. You spent a good part of your young life there. Can you imagine going back?
I would love to, but I can't. I've been there. I actually went there, moved there in 2002 and stayed there until 2004, not knowing that there was dictatorship into the country. So right now, I can't, even as much as I would want to.
Okay. All right. Well, let's move on. A big question that all of Europe and Russia is asking right now is who will decide the future of Ukraine? Well, for 4 weeks, hundreds of thousands of protesters have filled Kiev's Independence Square, demanding a new course, a new leadership. President Yanukovych drawing anger for steering his country closer to Russia while Europe opens its door to more trade. It looks like a tug of war between Brussels and Moscow. Is there a peaceful solution between East and West, or is Ukraine about to be torn apart?
Tens of thousands of anti-government protesters once again poured onto Kiev's main square over the weekend. Not far away, a smaller crowd showed up in support of President Viktor Yanukovych's party, which is backed by many in Ukraine's mostly Russian-speaking east. The pro-EU protests erupted last month after Yanukovych chose to reject a trade deal with the European Union and instead seek closer ties with Russia. Brussels has now suspended work on that agreement, saying it's increasingly clear the government in Kiev has no intention of signing the pact. But the protesters on Independence Square are keeping up the pressure and are determined to force Yanukovych into a rethink. At the moment, though, it's unclear who will prevail in the tug-of-war over Ukraine's future.
Irina, what would a solution look like for Ukraine? What is the answer?
Well, the most easier case scenario would be for Yanukovych to sign the agreement. I think that would release the pressure a little bit. But actually, after the violence which has happened on the streets using police, that might not satisfy the people. And the demand now is for Yanukovych to resign, to have early elections, and also to have a new cabinet of ministers, and to punish people who were responsible for violence which took place on the street.
Do you think that's going to happen?
Well, I know that a lot of people are not going to leave until something like this is going to happen. Yanukovych is also not going to give up. He is willing to preserve the power, and even after 2015, when the presidential elections are supposed to take place. So it's a very tense situation, a very kind of stalemate. The hope is that there will be some division inside the ruling party, and members of this party will join with coalition and have the majority in the parliament, and then they can find a solution to have Yanukovych out. That might be the easiest way out.
What do you feel about all of the external input that your country's been getting? I mean, we've seen Catherine Ashton from the EU going into Kiev to talk with the protesters as well as the president. We saw the Senator John McCain from the United States. He was also there standing on the stage. Is that helping or hurting the protesters?
No, it's helping. It supports the protesters. I also would like to recall that Victoria Nuland, the Deputy State Secretary, also was in Kiev. And actually, the violence happened on the night when she and Ashton were in Kiev, which means that Yanukovych doesn't really care much about international pressure or pressure coming from the West. But it's a big help for protesters. And it's important that Victoria Nuland also met some richest Ukrainians, trying to persuade them that stability would be in their favor.
Okay, and this is something new, right? This is where you've got the United States, the EU, willing to talk to the oligarchs in the Ukraine. I mean, they're recognizing these incredibly wealthy people as political forces.
Yes, that's true.
Is that good? I mean, didn't you fight against some of that in the Orange Revolution? Didn't you want these oligarchs also to be pushed out?
Yeah, but you know, I mean, these things are not so black and white. If you look at Russia and what happened in Russia after Mikhail Khodorkovsky was imprisoned, and in which way democracy has developed in Russia, so I think having oligarchs in this situation is probably better than they create some system of check and balances which doesn't exist otherwise.
I mean, that's quite a statement to be making, though, right? I mean, did you imagine you'd be saying that, in 2004? I mean, it's the irony of history is at this table right now.
Yeah, but I mean, it's inevitable to have this kind of people if you are on transition. We had robber barons in US, right, some time ago. You had these richest people in many other countries before they became democracies and rule of law countries. So it's probably an inevitable step in the direction towards democracy.
Okay.
And the question is under what conditions these people will be able or will agree to have the rule of law and democracy. It might take some time. But at the moment, it seems it's good to have them to counterbalance the president who wants to concentrate too much power.
I've spent a lot of time in the past week reporting on one of the Klitschko brothers, the champion boxers. He's getting a lot of attention now. He's actually been in talks with the president, something that he said he wouldn't do, 2 weeks ago. Could you imagine him being your next president?
Well, he would be the most likely person, given that Tymoshenko is in jail, because if she is out, she might be the stronger rival. At the moment, he has the same amount of votes as Yanukovych. If people are asked whom they would vote for in the first round, they have the equal amount of votes. So he's the strongest one among other oppositional leaders.
And you think Tymoshenko, she's out of the game completely?
Well, if Yanukovych is going to resign, or there is pressure on him to do so, then automatically she will be out of jail. And this might create some problems for the opposition, actually.
And for Klitschko as well, right?
As well, yeah. But there are some other people who also have ambitions. It's actually very important, probably, for the opposition leaders to put aside ambitions, but think about the future of the country and maybe choose someone who would represent the democratic or oppositional camp.
Well, what are we seeing with Ukraine here? Ask, Miron and Torsten, ask both of you. What has Ukraine become in the last 4 weeks? There's a tug of war here, but it's not just about free trade.
Exactly. It's also about geopolitics, and at least in the minds of the Russians and the minds of some in the EU, it's a kind of a geopolitical struggle. Will Ukraine be on Europe's side, on the EU side, or will it be on Russia's side? And I think we need to be mindful of the intentions of the Russian government and be skeptical of the intentions of the Russian government and stand with the aspirations of the Ukrainian people who want a more decent, fairer society with less corruption, more European values. But we also need to kind of critically rethink, why did it come to this? Why wasn't this trade agreement signed earlier on? Did we do everything we could have done to offer to the Ukrainian in terms of also visa-free travel to Ukrainian youth to come to Europe to study, also to be mindful of the adjustment cost of free trade?
But do you think that the European Union can beat upon itself right now? I mean, they were in negotiations for 7 years. This association agreement, is a 1,000-page document. It's not like they haven't been thinking about everything. I mean, the agreement was on the table.
Exactly. But I don't think the EU has been as generous this time around in terms of paying for some of the adjustment costs that free trade brings than they were in previous times. It has been negotiated. It's hard to open this up because it's a compromise among different players in the European Union. You're right, it will be very hard to renegotiate this trade agreement, but at least I do think that the EU has to be self-critical and say what more can it do to engage with the Ukraine, also to mediate and not to fuel the flames, and also to be critical of those voices in the Ukraine that are rabidly anti-Russian. I can understand that one needs to kind of defend the country against those Russians who claim that Ukraine is not a separate country, it's a part of Russia anyway. But I think you also have to go against ultra-nationalism on the Ukrainian side.
All right, Mara, let me pull you in too. You have contact with activists in Ukraine. Tell us a little bit about that.
As my program is about Eritrean refugee issues, so there are many Eritrean refugees stuck in Ukraine. So then
they're stuck in Ukraine trying to get into the EU.
Yes, exactly. They would get a visa to Moscow, and then via Moscow trying to get to one of the EU countries, and they would get caught in Ukraine and detained. So Ukraine are not familiar with Eritrea's situation or what kind of country Eritrea is. So they don't know how to process their asylum claim. Most of the Somalis would be returned, and other people from other countries in Africa. But with Eritreans, we do whatever we can, we'd contact UNHCR and everywhere. So it has been very difficult to process their asylum claim. And some, actually, it took us almost a year to get them out of prison, because the judge just said for entering the country you will be in prison for a year and then deported to your country. And then for a year, we had to go to pull out the strings and networks, everything that we have. Yeah. And then after a year they were resettled.
But it's interesting that when you say that, describing what happens to Eritreans in Ukraine, and then we look at what happens in Lampedusa, do you really think the situation for refugees would be better if Ukraine looked to the West?
It's not about that. I mean, if I'm going to be honest and discuss about it, of course, I mean, these people are. That's why we called it the trafficking cycle, because it's everywhere. It's not only in the Sinai, but the solution is the regime in Eritrea. Because as long as we have dictatorship, right now 5,000 youths are fleeing, but it would just increase to 7,000 to 10,000 probably a month. Yeah. So that is long-term solution. But the short-term solution is looking at these people. What can we do for them? When they are here, Merkel discusses always about integration. What are we doing for integration? Are we doing it in a wrong way? People just look at, we don't want refugees. But at the same time, I know that...
Well, the refugees are there, too. I mean,
yes,
we can't
exactly.
wish them away.
Yeah.
Irina, you know, we're running out of time here. When you look at your country, I mean, I've been asking, you know, this to all the guests when we've been talking about the situation in Ukraine. Are you a European, or do you feel in your heart more Russian?
No, I'm a European, and I think we should. I think the major conflict in Ukraine is not between being pro-Russian or pro-European, but the conflict is between remaining in the Soviet type of the society where authorities rule and decide what they want to do with the country, or moving towards a European type of society where you have people deciding whom they want to represent their interests.
And isn't that what don't you want to move closer to Europe, become a member of the European Union?
Well, that's membership in the European Union is a distant prospect. The first thing people in the streets want, and I want, Ukraine become a European country. And we can then put membership on the agenda. But for the time being, it's making a country European one, making authorities accountable, reducing corruption. So what is going on now is that we have a new type of people which say we don't want to live in the country we lived before, in the post-Soviet type of country. We want to live in the European country and want our country to become a European one.
Very briefly before we say goodbye, are you part of a generation, are you one of the last fighters of the dying Cold War?
I was in the school when the Cold War was coming to an end, so I remember those times. Yeah, but I associate myself with independent Ukraine.
All right. Well, thank you to you and everyone on the show today. And remember, we would like for you to keep the conversation going about these topics today on Twitter and Facebook. You can tell me what you think about the show as well. You can find me on Facebook, and you can tweet me at Brent Goff TV, or use hashtag DW Agenda. And if you want to watch the show again, you can go to dw.de, or you can watch us on YouTube. I'm Brent Goff in Berlin. Join me next time when I set the agenda.